or husband's birthday?
I have various mnemonics I use, but I suspect that's not the answer you're looking for. Go for it.
Well, you just forget it once.
Ah, that's pretty good.
Thanks, Paul. That's a great joke, and that's a great way to start us off. Welcome, everybody. Let's get going. We're 1 minute behind here. Before Dan Thirkill starts off, just want to do a couple of bookkeeping things. The first thing is that I want to remind you guys this is recorded, so don't say something that you don't want to appear on the internet. The next thing is our next soaring seminar is next week, next Wednesday at 7:30 p.m. Bruno Vassal is going to be talking about soaring out of Nephi. It's the last of the site series of safe soaring out of our soaring site seminars. Also, I want to bring attention to additional seminars have been added to the schedule. With Stan McGrew, we'll be doing a seminar on emergency parachuting on March 17th. So we have seminars weekly up until March 17th. Please keep an eye on emails that I'm sending out, as there will be more added. So probably we'll have seminars weekly until the beginning of the soaring season. So that should all get us in the mood to do some flying. So with that, Dan Thirkill, why don't you go ahead and start?
Sure. First, a nice hands appreciation to you, Art, for continuing this. The winter seminars are obviously well received, and the fact that we're doing them online in the land and time of COVID is pretty good. They're fun. We've been doing them now. We started off with Tim Taylor up at the north doing Logan and mountain soaring. Some very good insight on that, as well as some good travels to consider for future options. Then, of course, Paul followed up with his events at Hebert, places to soar around the ski resorts there, the Uintas, out around the Wallsbergs and over toward Timpanogos. Following that, of course, we had last week Lynn Alley doing his, I'll just call it his premiere presentation on Wave. Lynn has been doing that many times, and he's obviously a well-versed expert, not only in flying the Wave, but in understanding it and being able to convey how that works, how to get into it, and how to fly it safely, considering the majesty and the strength of those Wave foundations. Pretty amazing stuff. With that said, I'm going to transition into Morgan. I like Morgan. I have been there for many years, and it suits me well. Not just because I happen to live pretty close to the place, but admittedly, there are some pretty amazing people there. Having said that, I want to talk about what the intent is for this evening. Art had requested that we basically give background on the different soaring venues within the club, and within that, 3 tiers. So I want to talk about the new pilot, or the beginner, if you will, the new minted pilot, some of the opportunities available in Morgan for that person, the intermediate person getting into cross-country, and of course what I'll politely call the cross-country king and or queen. There's a lot of opportunity where we fly. In Morgan, I want to start with an overview, and I want to tip my hat to Dave Cleveland here, because there are, on the club website, multiple overview documents. And these have been established with coordination principally from Dave with a variety of different pilots at the sites that give you an idea of the area, some constraints, some things to be aware of, some operating procedures with what we call SOPs, standard operating procedures. They're on the club website. You want to come fly where everyone is? Take a look at those things beforehand, because they'll give you some great information. Let me just open up Dave's Morgan overview so you can see that. So this is it. And there's one for each website. Dave has gone to the extent of actually labeling some of the things you need to be aware of, the facilities that are available, what hangars are where, who owns what, where to find things. It's to your advantage when you go from site to site to take advantage of this nicely culminated information that Dave's put together. It's well worth the effort. With that in mind, let's go back to the slide show here, and I want to talk about these three things about Morgan: the area, the people, and the facilities. Now, Morgan is essentially, it's a public airport. It's located in the township of Mountain Green. So it's about 8 miles west of the city of Morgan, Utah, and actually about 8 miles east of Ogden, Utah. It has an excellent opportunity to fly. We have, of course, thermals, we have ridge, and we have wave. If you were here last week and you saw Lynn's presentation on that, but it's really a delightful place. We have an amazing group of people. We have an amazing aviation community. It's really made up of a nice small mix of single-engine power pilots and numerous glider pilots. So lots of glider pilots, surprisingly. Lynn Alley is stationed there. He's the chief instructor for the club. We also have Bernie Fullenkamp, who is the glider steward for Morgan. There are a number of instructors, and of course, my favorite curmudgeon, Stan McGrew, which by now most of you have been pretty familiar with. And if you aren't, you will be, because Stan is not one to not vocalize. When Stan has an opinion, you'll know it. But the nice thing about Stan for me is, admittedly, he's a very, very close friend, a confidant, and actually, much to his amusement, he's the guy that taught me how to fly gliders. He didn't think a helicopter pilot from the Air Force could fly gliders, but I proved him wrong. And I think in reality, Stan really, really likes helicopters. So that's a story for another time. The facilities in Morgan are really, really good. We've now got a club, I don't know, what do you want to call it, a little storage shed. And let me just transition over here to, let's see.
Hey, Dan, if you go to full screen view, we'll be able to see your slides better. I think do that, right?
I'm in full screen view. Can you see that?
I could see your pedestal before. It's gone now.
Okay. Great.
Thanks.
Thank you. No, and that's
Dale, are you a college professor or something? What's going on?
Yeah, I do this all day long.
Yeah, this is Dale's capability and ability to critique on a very credible level. So thank you, Dale. I appreciate that. So this is Morgan, and I've switched to Google Earth, which is probably one of the neatest tools around to be able to understand a few things. That's the same image you just had on the PowerPoint, but I'm going to shift over to 2D here because I can do some really cool things like zoom in and tell you this is the club hangar. This is not the hangar. This is where the club storage shed is. That is where you're going to find all the little goodies like tow-out gear, all the cleaning supplies, and this and that and the other. And amazingly, there's a club glider. Over here at Stan McGrew's hangar is the battery box. The reason it's not in the storage shed is because the storage shed does not have electricity. You can find the battery box associated on the east side of Stan's hangar. 7183 on the lock will get you in. You grab your battery, you take it back to the glider, and you're off and running. Typically, we have at least one Grobe on the airfield, often two, sometimes even the Pilatus. Those will be parked here. Bernie, his hangar is missing because this picture is old enough that it doesn't show that Bernie actually has a new hangar constructed right here. And the reason I mentioned Bernie Fullenkamp's hangar is because that's where you'll find the club alien space vehicle, also known as a funky little golf cart that you can use if you do not have tow-out gear to take a glider out. It can be used to transport goods and material on your glider as appropriate. So that's a nice view of the area itself. I want to shift over to the PowerPoint again, and we'll go into this because I want to now talk about the beginning pilot.
Oh, we can stop stealing Lynn's oxygen because there's oxygen in the club shed.
Yes, thank you, Chris. That's correct. We had it last year, actually, and maybe this was good for people who wanted to be possible thieves. We had it in Dale and my hangar, and we had no issue with people taking it because they never did. But it is now moved, as you note, Chris, into the club storage shed. So thank you. That's good. The beginning pilot, newly minted. What can they do at Morgan? Well, we have a number of different areas. And these are the principal areas that you'll find when you go out and do a standard pattern for pattern work. We don't have a lot of traffic at Morgan unless you come on Saturdays. And I'll put that as a qualifier because lately, a lot of the power pilots have been doing a lot of training on Saturday. And I have found that to do so myself with the glider, it's a little congested. During the week, weekends, at night, weekdays at night, fantastic. There's hardly anybody around. So you can do a lot of pattern work. Typically our patterns, we take off 2-1. We hook over with a crosswind to the east. You go on back up to what we call the Mahogany Ridge, up to Little Mahogany and Big Mahogany. You can practice a lot of patterns here just on a ridge lift that's associated with that. You feel a little more confident. You can go up to the Durst and practice your thermal routines along this ridge. Go along over to Elk Mountain a little further to the north and to the west, and you'll find some house thermals there. And when you get a little bit more adventurous, you can start heading out to the north and to the west. This area here is Snow Basin. And this, of course, continues along the Wasatch Ridge up to Brigham City, Box Elder Peak. We continue along over to Logan. We've got Powder Mountain over here. There's a lot of different areas here. So one, you've got minimum traffic. And two, because we are in a mountainous area, you may notice that in these pictures here, you can work on a visual perspective illusion. And I like this one when I take people out because when you're on downwind, you are on a terrain elevation that is higher than the airfield that you're going to land on. And as you're coming down in your pattern altitude, you find yourself closer and closer to the ground, and it feels like you're going faster than you think you should be. But that is a visual illusion that you need to understand, because it's very important to understand to keep speed well ahead of the game, to keep nice coordinated turns when you turn on to base and into final to land. And we have that lovely little bench that's just to the east of the runway on our downwind landing into Morgan. And it's a good place to understand and visualize that perspective and get used to it. You learn how to fly at Morgan, you're going to learn how to fly just about anywhere. We have easy access to lift generators. There's a lot of thermal and wrench work, and there's a lot of opportunity for what I'll politely call distance stretching as well, which is a lovely segue to my next slide, getting into cross country. This is for the intermediate pilots, the folks that are about ready to cut the apron strings. What does that mean? It means you're going to leave enough distance between you and the airport that if you can't find lift, you're probably going to land in a farmer's field, or you're going to land somewhere other than the home airport you came from. So what I want to talk about are the few things here that you can do to increase your capability. And one of those is an expanding triangle. This illustrates a 100-kilometer triangle that originates from Morgan, heads down to the southeast toward Echo Reservoir with a turn point at Colville, then heads up to the northeast toward Evanston with a turn point of what we call No Name, and then back into Morgan. Now, this is, as I say, 100 kilometers, 60 miles, but these are great to learn by. It doesn't have to be 100 kilometers. You could have 60, you could have 30, whatever you are comfortable with in learning how to transition from being a beginner pilot to a more intermediate pilot. So what this does, it gives you an opportunity, depending on the weather conditions of the day, to experience perhaps a tailwind in one direction, maybe a crosswind in another, a headwind, various turbulence levels, good lift going some way, perhaps no land outs another. But a really nice thing here is that you can cruise along, get great lift, get great lift, get great lift, head out to the next point and go, ugh, not so good. And you can turn back and go home. Or maybe you'll catch lift and continue on. So these expanding triangles, because of the Morgan area, and you can do these anywhere, it doesn't matter where you are, but we've got them to East Canyon, to Echo Reservoir, Powder Mountain, Camas, which is by the Uintas, Evanston, whatever. Another great thing about Morgan, go ahead.
Dan, you're back in presenter mode again. So if you click on that pedestal, it'll get bigger again, and the map will be easier to see. You know what I mean?
I do, but I'm not going to do that because I pointedly have not allowed the PowerPoint to go into the full screen mode because transitioning from app to app is much easier here. That's why I've got the PowerPoint at a lesser resolution.
Okay, got it.
Got it. One thing about Morgan, it is between Heber and it is between Logan. Kind of conveniently situated, almost absolutely in between both of them as far as distance. You can get your silver badge if you go north, and you can get your silver badge if you go south. We also have the Wasatch Ridge, which of course is adjacent to the Salt Lake Valley, and that can take you up to Brigham City, and it can take you down to Nephi. Or you can catch the wave and go just about anywhere you want. But having said all that, what I'm going to do is transition over to see you and show you what I'll politely call an intrepid pilot's event in doing this so-called 100-kilometer triangle. Let's see, that's a little slow. Well, we're on takeoff, we're catching lift. Let me bump the speed up on that a bit. So we got some good turns, we got some good altitude. Let's head on to our first point. Not feeling too confident, going to get some more. Now I'm over Durst. Now I'm heading out toward Coville. Oh, okay, not bad. You get the idea here. You just move along from point to point. You hook your turn point, you continue out, and now you're on to the next one. If you're feeling good, happy day. The thing is, heading out to the northeast toward Evanston, and this no-name point is Tigerland. You cannot land here, not well. So this particular pilot decided not comfortable heading back toward Morgan, but then found lift, found more lift, decided to head out. Lo and behold, happy day, poof, hooks that turn point, and now got final glide all the way back to Morgan. You finish one of these, go out and do it again. Same day, same time, maybe an hour or two later, same conditions, get better. Come back again, and maybe a little late in the day to go out for a third attempt, but you get the idea. The more you do these kind of exercises, the more comfortable and the more confident you're going to get in your cross-country ability. So that's what it looked like. Our guy took off from Morgan, he hooked the turn point at Colville, didn't feel too comfortable heading northeast toward the turn point at No Name, headed back toward Morgan because he could go home, and then found lift, headed back north and east, hooked Colville, and then took it home. Good times. All right, the advanced pilot. Sky's the limit. We have, as I mentioned, this optimum location. And Dale, I got to ask you, are we okay? Can you see enough stuff here?
Yeah, I mean, well, you're not showing anything right now. All we see is cross country king/queen.
Right. Do you see the side panel where it says advanced and sky's the limit and all that crap?
Yes.
Okay, good enough. So my point here is that really, once you get comfortable with who you are and what you can do with this aircraft, man, we're blessed with such a location there that you can just do almost anything. You can head out east to Uintas. You can go up north to the Logan Ridge and join Tim's expeditions out way north up there. If you want, shoot, go down to Nephi. I've actually flown back from Nephi to Morgan, and it was a fun challenge, but I landed at Morgan without landing at Hebrew. It was a good thing. And a wave, of course, is gorgeous, absolutely gorgeous. Now, with this in mind, I have a number of flights that occurred last year. This is 2020, the year of COVID. And I want to bring those up because we've got a few folks that they'll be embarrassed to consider themselves a king and or queen of cross country. They'd never admit that, but they have done some amazing things. Bernie did incredibly well with OLC, online competition, this year. And I think he was challenged because, quite frankly, he wanted to beat Lynn. And he got some pointers with Lynn, and he learned that he had to extend his time and he had to extend his turn points. And this particular flight is a wave flight from Morgan to the south and to the north. So let me just transition over to the IGC file for that. And in Bernie, are you online?
I am. Can you hear me?
I can. Can you go ahead and take off with this? I'll go ahead and start the flight. Let me first kill my other one so that we can make sure that we've got the appropriate access. There we go. And I'm going to bump this up to 200. And Bernie, feel free to fill in the blanks.
Yeah, if this is the flight, Dan, we talked about, this was on the 12th of October, and we had several wave flights before. But I think what you see me doing there initially is working behind Francis Peak, or what we call the golf balls. And this particular flight, I really worked my way all the way up to 17.8, 17.9 before heading north, and then get about halfway between the gap between Wellsville and Gunsight before coming back south with a southern turn point close to about 180, Interstate 80, and then heading back north to pretty much repeat the same thing. I use ClearNav, so my breadcrumb trail is pretty precise, and if I'm happy with the lift in the various wave areas, I stay with that breadcrumb. On this particular day, I was able to stay high for the first north and south. On the second north and south, I lost a couple thousand feet, and as I headed back north, the wave was no longer working, so I snuck through Weber Canyon, and you see that I made a couple north-south passes on the front side, before sneaking back through Weber Canyon and landing back at Morgan. A couple quick comments. I'll echo Dan's comment that I love Morgan. I specifically moved here a couple minutes from the airfield 3.5 years ago because I just saw the potential, and it's been far better than I ever dreamed. But I would disagree with that. I don't consider myself a cross-country king or queen.
I knew
and that so many folks have done so much better. I ended up with some pretty good scores, and I look to improve upon that. But some things about the flight we just watched, some mistakes I would say that I made is we almost always start on the backside of Francis Peak, on the east of the radome there for Salt Lake City approach. On this particular flight, I worked a short section back and forth all the way until I got up to just short of 18 before I headed north. On some of my flights after this one, after some coaching by Lynn, once I had kind of established an appropriate offset from the crest, both based on what I was seeing on ClearNav as well as visually what I was being able to see, I started to head north much sooner, and then work the successive wave behind Snow Basin, jumped the Ogden Canyon, worked the wave behind Ben Lomond, jumped the next gap, worked the wave behind Wellsville, and worked that and continued to climb as I go north, as opposed to climbing all the way to 17.8 or 17.9 before even heading north for the first time. So some of my subsequent flights were more efficient on that front, and that was just some good coaching from Lynn. That said, I still feel relatively inexperienced in the wave, but this particular flight is relatively easy to do out of Morgan in terms of going just north of Logan and then back down to Interstate 80. 2 weeks, I was a little bit more cautious on this flight because 2 weeks before this flight, I had taken off a couple minutes before Lynn and very quickly climbed to just short of 18 and headed north without losing any altitude whatsoever. When I jumped the gap between Wellsville and Gunsight, I had myself convinced that I was going to be able to connect on the wave, north of Preston. And I kept pressing north, looking at the mountains and convincing myself that I was going to be able to connect. I did. Found myself landing at Preston, unable to get back south. So I was a bit more cautious on this flight, but I think even as I just call myself an advanced intermediate, wave out of Morgan was exciting. This particular flight that Dan just showed was just short of 500K, and OLC scored it at 127, which is pretty kilometers per hour, which for me is pretty fast. I'm usually a lot slower than that. So. But that would be my insight. I'm still got a lot to learn, but thoroughly love running out of Morgan.
Thank you, Bertie. Okay, my next contestant for King of Cross Country, who will deny that he is Art. But having said that, Art has had some pretty phenomenal flights out of Morgan as well. This particular one is a combination of wave, as well as ridge, as well as a bit of mentoring with Tim Taylor, whom Art contacted on this flight, who joined Art on the Logan Ridge, took him north into Idaho, and brought him back. So, Art, if you would be so kind, I will bring up your particular flight, and you can provide appropriate comment as well.
Yeah, sure. I do sort of bristle. I do sort of bristle at the description of calling me a cross-country king. I usually count the success of my soaring seasons by how many times I beat Lynn on OLC. So that's I would say I'm a intermediate. But just to preface this flight, it was actually a very unusual day. The forecast actually looked pretty typical for a wave day in Morgan. It wasn't booming wave, but it was predicted to be pretty reasonable wave, especially behind Logan. And one thing that I ended up finding is that the wave up in Logan kind of collapsed on me, and I got flushed out onto the ridge. And here I am on the ridge. Here you see me. That was actually Plan B. I was hoping to fly the ridge or fly the wave all the way up to Preston, but wasn't able to. But luckily the ridge was working great. And at this point, I was actually talking to Tim Taylor on the radio, and I'd been trying to get a hold of him and fly with him earlier on in the month to do the Logan Ridge, because I'd never done the Logan Ridge before. And so he came over and joined me on the Wellsvilles, and we're doing a sort of a leader-follower style flight here on the Wellsvilles, on the Logan Ridge. And I'd never flown the Logan Ridge at all, and hadn't flown sort of the Logan face. And so we're kind of doing some leader-follower stuff here. One unusual thing about this day was that normally on a ridge/wave day, the ridge isn't working below 3,000 feet. That's pretty typical. 3,000 feet AGL. But today, or this particular day, it was actually working fairly well down low. So that's kind of what I took advantage of to make it through Snow Basin and back home. So yeah, this ended up being more than a 500K flight, but is a really just a great example of mentorship and kind of shows the strength of our soaring community when you have someone like Tim Taylor willing, a world competitor willing to take a step off his pedestal and join us measly intermediates in my dinky LS4. So it was a really great day. Had a blast.
Well spoken. All right. Next contestant, Chris Roberts and Rob Eckel. This isn't a club bird, folks. This was a training flight. This is heading out of Morgan, in wave, but instead of heading north toward Logan and up toward Idaho, these guys went south. They went way south. They went almost to Nephi. And let me transition over to that particular flight. And gentlemen, I don't know who's going to take the lead, but if one of you would at least start the chat, then we can begin to talk about your flight.
So Chris here with piano accompaniment.
Nice touch.
This was intended to finish Rob's wave checkout for the club, because we did a ridge checkout and hit some wave, and he said, "Hey, can I do this?" And I said, "No, we got to get a real one." We picked this day. We picked this day maybe a week out because we wanted a tight phone gap, we wanted a lot of moisture, and we wanted a lot of wind. This was a zero-risk flight. We were in final glide to a club airfield at every single portion of this flight. Heading back north where we are right now, the ridgetop winds had picked up from about 20 knots when we took off to 60. One of our goals was to contact the secondary wave, which if we had tried to do that, we would have landed out with a 60-knot headwind going back into Morgan. So, again, no risk, no tricks. I think Rob was watching SkySight, and I was looking outside. I love the gadgets, but when it's this humid on a day like it was when we were flying, it's better to look outside. One, so you don't go IMC, and two, so you know where the lift is, because it was very clearly marked the entire length of this flight. So in the Fatty Grove, I think we averaged, over 100 kilometers per hour on a 3.5 hour flight.
It was 100 kilometers an hour average.
Yeah, by the time we got on the northbound leg, we had intended to go up to Preston. The wind had picked up so much ridgetop, the lift was still workable, but the wavelength of the wave had extended greatly. So normally, Dan, if you'll put your mouse over Morgan, it's where the big red blob is. Normally the primary wave parallels right there, parallels the ridge line north and south. That primary wave had shifted to about 5 miles to the east of Morgan because the wind had picked up so much. So we could have continued, but the problem with the wavelength of the wave getting so wide is the phone gap closed completely. So we were VMC above, and we could have just flown to a waypoint in the computer all the way up to Morgan, but in the interest of safety, we decided not to do that. Rob, do you have anything to add from your perspective on that flight?
Yeah, I think one of the reasons we chose to go south to begin with was there were more clouds to the north. It was definitely better to the south as far as the phone gap goes. So it was a really low stress flight going south. We just had to get high enough to get over the bridge over I-80, where the clouds kind of came out. There was a layer below us. But, we never got below 14,000 feet the whole flight, and we were within glider ratio of Heber most of the time. Coming back north, the phone gap was starting to close up a bit, and we wanted to try to go north still, but we didn't want to fly over top of that layer, so we came down, I think, probably around 12,000 and tried to go north, but the lift just wasn't working as well down low. So.
And it wasn't because the wind across the ridge had gotten excessive, and that's something to watch when you're as the day progresses and you're flying. If you know the conditions are going to change through the day, that's definitely something to watch.
So that's all I've got.
All right, gentlemen, outstanding flight, good fun.
Hey, Dan, if I can cut in, I had the privilege of towing both Chris and Rob on this particular flight, and obviously, as they've described, the blue gap between the cap cloud and the lenticular was really obvious behind Francis Peak, and so for those less familiar with going to wave out of Morgan, we take off on 2-1 that particular day. After crossing the freeway, made my left-hand turn back toward the airfield, but basically 360'd and then headed south to basically tow parallel to the leading edge of the lenticular. If I recall, Chris and Rob, you guys got off right around 85, 9,000, something like that, but we're off and running southbound immediately. I went back to Morgan, I think put less than 2/10 on the tow plane for that wave tow.
Oh, and the final thing is there is no compressibility chart published, I think, for the Twin Aster. There is for the Grobe 103, the Twin 2. Our maximum speed, I think, on that flight was 280 kilometers per hour. And I would say, particularly on the northbound leg, we were close to flutter for a good bit of that. So that's something else to watch. And we never went to 18,000. We were able to do this whole thing at 16,000 or so.
Impressive. Thank you. All right, the next one is a state record. And it's interesting, if you notice my imagery on the right side of the slide, the visuals keep getting higher and higher to capture the greater and greater distance. This particular flight was by Lynn Alley and Aaron. And Lynn is, he's a bit of a record freak. And he's been doing these things for many, many, many years. And Lynn, I hope you're on. I don't know.
I'm here. Can you hear me?
Oh, good. Because Lynn has some background on this flight that is really impressive. And it's not about this flight. It's about the previous record holders. So before I even turn your flight on, Lynn, if you'd like to just go ahead and mention that a bit, then I'll turn your flight on and we'll go from there.
Well, yeah, before I get started, I have just a couple of reactions to what's been said so far. You'll note that some of the, quote, non-kings or intermediate pilots have said what a great, amount of fun they have beating me. And the reason that they enjoy it so much is it's an achievable goal. They can go out there. And if you're an intermediate pilot, it's an achievable thing to beat me. So I think they've had a lot of fun doing that. Art has, in particular, done some truly astounding things. Some of them in the Pilatus. He has, on 2 occasions that I know, led the nation on the OLC score, flying out of Morgan in the Pilatus. So there's some pretty amazing achievements.
Lynn, I think. Hey, Lynn, I remember back in Nephi, you called me king of the dumpy gliders.
See, Art? It does.
He didn't call me a cross-country king. No, he called me the king of the dumpy gliders.
Well, if anybody bests those Pilatus performances, I'll take him to dinner. I'll tell you, those are pretty amazing things. To talk about this flight in the background about it a little bit. Here's kind of what happened. There's a goal that stood in the Utah State record book since 1967. So how long is that? 50. How many is that? 56 years or something like that. 54 years. 54 years. And I've been gunning for this one for at least 15 years. And I'll tell you a little bit about the story about it. In 1959, a guy named Ed Mingeli had an emotion which is near and dear to my heart, and that is that there ought to be such things in the world as high-performance two-place gliders. And there really weren't previous to that. And Ed decided to design and build it's a guy named Irv Prue decided to design and and build a high-performance two-place glider. And I have been unable to determine if there were one or two of them ever built, but there might have been just a single one. It was called the Pru 2, and he aspired to make a 20-meter two-place high-performance glider in 1959. He ended up partnering up with a guy named Ed Mingeli, and Ed financed the glider, and they built it, and it took them 8 years to build the Pru 2. And they ended up shortening it to 18.5 meters because of structural issues that they encountered when they were building the glider. But at the end of it, it was an 18.5 meter all metal two-place glider, flush riveted over every inch of it, and it had an L over D of about 36 to 1. So comparable performance to a twin ester made in a garage or a hangar or something like that in Southern California in the 1960s. It's a huge achievement. And they went out and decided to set some world records with it. Ed brought a tow pilot, a bunch of crews, a tow plane, several pilots, and they came up to Cedar City and camped out for their first world record attempts in July of 1967, late June and early July of 1967. And the first record that they claimed was a declared out and return flight that they flew from Cedar City to Thistle. Thistle's not there anymore, but it's in Spanish Fork Canyon. So it's 367 miles that they did that out and return record. It stood as a world record for about 6 months, and it stood as a state record for 54 years, as I've kind of mentioned. You know, it's really not too difficult a flight in a lot of ways. You know, Bruno's made a lot of flights longer than that. A number of guys on the call here have made a lot of flights longer than that. But I'll tell you, we have to declare it and do it from someplace. It is a difficult task to accomplish. I made over 15 years on the order of 18 attempts to do it. 2 of them out of Parowan. Most of the attempts I made were out of Nephi. I tried over and over and over and over again out of Nephi. And the trouble is getting the day that you can do it lined up with, you know, a good weather day and all that kind of stuff. It's just a ferocious task if you're not flying out of your home airport when you do it. Because unlike Ed Mingeli and Irv Prue, I didn't have my own tow plane and my own crew to go down and attempt it. Most of the flights out of Nephi, I got stopped by fires over the Wasatch Plateau or weird weather going. You had to go Nephi to St. George and back, basically. And weird weather south of Parowan, I got stopped, you know, numbers of times. It was a difficult thing to do. And I ended up deciding if I couldn't do it out of Morgan, I couldn't do it. So I had to try to find a way. The trouble is that if the truth be told, Morgan is a difficult place to fly records out of because it starts a little later in the day than, say, Nephi does or even Heber. And so it's kind of tough to start out of Morgan and do a flight that long on thermal days because you get started a little bit later on in the day and it's tough to complete it before the day wears out. So I thought really hard about how to do this, and here's the dirty little secret. I've flown 13 state records, 12 state records out of Morgan, but this one was really not exactly a Morgan flight. In order to do it, we aerotowed down toward Heber to get our start. And we released near Deer Valley and started there about 12:30 in the afternoon. And we had a pretty good start. It was on the 18th of August, and we had a pretty good start getting down south of Heber and onto the Wasatch Plateau. The basic idea was to fly south along the Wasatch Plateau. Our declared turn point was near Escalante, Utah, about 70 miles north of the Arizona border, a place called Box Death Hollow. It's a state park just a little bit north of Escalante. And we had a pretty easy time going down the plateau. Our first kind of sign of weirdness was, well, we had to fly over a fire TFR on the south end of the plateau. We had to climb up really high and overfly the fire TFR to get south toward Escalante. And our first kind of sign of weirdness was we had to go out into the blue about 8 or 9 miles. That's like an 18 or 16 or 18 mile round trip to get our turn point. That was in an area of no lift. And so we got our turn point and came back. Aaron, you're on the call, aren't you?
Yeah, I'm here. I'm with you.
Yeah, Aaron's here. So as we started back, Aaron says to me, you know, are you nervous at all going back? Because we're going to get pretty low before we get back to the plateau. Is it going to be okay? And I said, oh, no, you know, I'm fine. We got Wayne Wonderland Airport right there next to us. A little lesson in preparation is it turned out Wayne Wonderland Airport had been closed for 6 months when we were making that flight that day. And we couldn't have gotten into Wayne Wonderland Airport. There were a lot of fields right around there we could have gotten into just fine, but it's probably a good idea to check NOTAMs along your course. If we would have known that, we would have been more frightened, huh, Aaron?
Yes, much more.
Yeah. So, Aaron, you want to talk about our northbound half of our flight?
You bet. Yeah, the northbound flight portion of the flight was much different than the southbound, that's for sure. Everything changed when we tiptoed, as it were, and kind of stretched one leg out away from the plateau to hook that turn point. And we were kind of hanging on to the plateau dearly because we didn't really want to lose that opportunity to catch the lift and start heading back to the north. So that's exactly what we did. We crossed our fingers and maybe even our eyes, and we dashed out, picked it up, and started heading back. And coming back was exactly what we anticipated. It wasn't quick to get back to the lift, and we found ourselves kind of scratching along, looking, going, okay, great, now we got to run over. Was it Huntington? Which airport?
Toward Huntington, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Toward Huntington, and it was just the opposite of the flight south. Now everything was looking a little bit dicey. Not scary, just we're not going to complete the task. And I'll bet there was probably 5 or 6 times where we thought, well, this isn't going to work. We're not going to make it. But we just never gave up. But as we went north, we got back up onto the plateau. We were a little bit lower than we wanted to be. We both kind of held our breath, read the clouds the best we could. And there is a caveat here. For those of you who don't know how to beat Lynn, just join them. It's much easier. Anyway, so you can't beat them, join them. That's what I do. Anyway, so we got under some decent lift and finally got back up. And as we're working north, the conditions started to change so much that we were worried about getting back to Morgan before sunset. And truth be told, was it 6 minutes before official sunset we touched down?
Yeah. There was
close.
When we made the turn point, we got stuck for 45 minutes or so, digging ourselves out of that area and then getting back up onto the plateau and going northbound. And from that moment, there was no point where either of us thought we were going to make it as far as
right.
the task. We looked back north and there was nothing but just overdeveloped, showery stuff over the plateau. And we ended up crossing, our first goal was just to establish a glide back to Manti and get on the ground maybe at Manti. And we made it a little farther north of that toward Mount Pleasant. And then we climbed in a weak thermal there and thought, well, maybe we could make Nephi. And so we crossed the valley. You can see on our return path there to the west, we crossed the valley back over toward Nephi and decided, well, maybe we can make Spanish Fork. And when we got into that area, we climbed in Spanish Fork Canyon and worked our way. And Aaron did a lot of the climbing in this northbound leg. And we finally got ourselves a glide to Heber. And I was convinced we were landing in Heber. And I even called Heidi on the phone and said, we're not going to make it. Come pick us up in Heber. And we glided toward Heber. And lo and behold, in Daniels Canyon, as we were approaching Heber, we hooked some little weak thing about 6:30 or so at night. And we worked it for the best part of an hour. And we hooked it at about, I want to say about 10,000 feet maybe or below. And we worked it for the best part of an hour. And after that climb, we found ourselves at about 7:30 p.m. at 17,000 feet.
Hey, Lynn,
Yeah.
Lynn, this fall. I told you last week or the week before that Heber always works, man. This is the best place to. So, thanks for getting your lift there.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, Paul.
And in Daniels Canyon, it's I've flew a bunch of years at Heber, and I have my own little lift stashes in Heber, and that's one of them. And we made a 54-mile final glide home from that,
right.
and not a hint of lift along the way, and landed 4 minutes before sunset.
It was. We both were speechless and maybe even a little misty-eyed by the time we got back, because not only did we make it, we didn't have to land at Heber, and we thought that we maybe had the record. But I'll let Lynn tell the story of the computer problem, because that one is gut-wrenching, and it was just we were excited and amazed that we made it, but totally defeated at the same time due to some computer problems.
Yeah, our declaration in the computer didn't work properly. It turned out there was a bug in the SN10 software that did it, but we had a paper declaration backup, thank heaven, that made it. And there are some intricacies in getting the paperwork done for the record claim, but it was approved and we got her done. So the interesting thing is that we did that in 2020 in a German glider that had a 44-1 lift to drag ratio that was made by really smart German guys. And we beat Ed Mengele's record in Erpru's glider by 3 miles.
Hey!
That was an incredible achievement that they did.
So Chris here, I have to add, I was misty-eyed when Lynn picked me for one of his attempts, because I thought he was going to be relying on my superb soaring skill and knowledge. But it turns out you can't make max gross in that airplane without 200 pounds of fat in the back seat.
Yeah, Chris, we're just dummy loads in the back. I know how you feel. Just ballast, right?
Happy ballast. As long as you don't have to relieve yourself, it's all good.
Well, Lynn and I have both discussed on this flight more than once, and I hope I'm not taking too much credit here, but I really don't think we could have done it without each other. It wasn't the kind of flight that we've had before where either of us were feeling like, yeah, we could have done that on our own, no problem. This flight felt different than that. It was emotional. It was points of high stress. There was times where we were both questioning ourselves as well as each other, and I feel like we made a concerted effort between the two of us for what turned out to be an incredible outcome. And I'm sure Lynn could have done it on his own, but at 8 hours of length and flight, nearly to the minute, it was physically taxing, and I think it took really both of us to kind of complement each other. And I don't know, I'll take a small part of the credit, but only a little, because, well, we all know how Lynn flies. He's pretty good.
Well, it was a lot of fun, is the doggone truth.
Well,
it was fun.
Okay. All right, then we'll let this one go and move on to the next. We are winding down with the presentation, so I won't belabor you too much, but by now you probably understand there's a lot of flight opportunities flying out of Morgan. I don't begrudge the other sites. That's not the problem. We are one great club. But the nice thing about Morgan is we can link all of the sites together, not with relative ease, but with some concerted effort. You can enjoy being able to soar north and enjoy Logan, fly south and enjoy Heber and Nephi. So here's one. That was a flight up toward Idaho. Here's another one. A flight down toward the Uintas. This is over Mirror Lake and Smith Morehouse. Here's another one that's actually flying over the ski resorts over Park City. This last one that I'll show you actually was a flight that not only went over the ski resorts in Park City, but decided, we still got lift. Let's go ahead and go over to Evanston. That was a ballsy move, because coming back from Evanston, if you don't have lift, you're in tiger country. So good on them. They made it back. The sky is the limit. I mentioned that, and I mean it, because we can do some amazing things with these gliders. They are incredible. The catch, but do not go unprepared. You need to learn transition skills to get out there. You got to practice, you've got to practice, you've got to practice. I've practiced a bit, but this was my very first land out in lovely Hennifer, Utah. And it was a good experience. Actually, it was a great experience. And if you're going to fly cross country and you're going to go out beyond the area of the airfield that you're comfortable with, and you're going to cut those apron strings, you may very well find yourself, and quite likely finding yourself, enjoying this kind of event as well. I just want to point out a couple of things. This was my first land out. It hasn't been my only land out. I've had a number of them. But when I came into Hennifer, which is just east of Morgan, unfortunately, there was not enough lift to make it over the last range of mountains to get home. And as much as I tried to go back and forth along the ridge to make it lift, it wouldn't. So eventually I pointed out a couple of possible landing areas, came in. The first one, as I got closer to the ground, realized it had too many telephone wires in it, appropriate poles. So my secondary landing area was this lovely alfalfa field. And from higher altitude, it didn't look as deep as you can see that it is here. And for those that have watched the Star Wars movie, when I came in to land, it was like Luke Skywalker flying into Dagobah, where he comes in and there's things flying all over as he's landing in the swamp. Well, I came in here and touched down. Nice approach, no problem. I stopped probably within 50 to 75 feet because the alfalfa was so high. The friction that it generated against those wing surfaces just brought me to a standstill. No problem. Everything worked. Nothing broken. Got out. The rest of this path is me dragging the aircraft out. So it was kind of a fun experience. And it was fun partly because, one, I had a great and willing retrieve crew, including the owner of the field, the farmer and his son, as well as an able and prepared trailer. And those are things that you need to make sure you have in your back pocket if you want to go fly cross country. Don't just leap out there unprepared. Flying is outstanding. Soaring is outstanding. I've done this long enough now that when I first began, I used to think that this was one of the safest sports available. It's not. If you screw up, it could cost a very heavy price. Practice. Know what you're doing. Make sure you're well prepared. Dave Cleveland next week is going to talk about safety. He'll get into more detail on that. But this is a glorious sport. Don't mess it up by messing yourself up. Okay, I have one last thing I want to do. I'm going to show a video. It's a little more than 6 minutes. It's a fun one, so bear with me. And we'll go from there.
I think we just lost him. I think he closed his meet tab. He'll be back.
Some piano music for you while we wait.
Sounds like I'm at a bar or something.
So, Lynn, are you still on?
I am. I'm here.
Can we talk about the doldrums that happen at Morgan in August and why we think that happens?
Oh, I don't know. I actually think August is often pretty doggone good. There are some times in August when things happen, but it's one of my favorite times to fly. Tell me what you're thinking about specifically.
I'm thinking about what I consider a maritime effect off of the Great Salt Lake with the westerlies that we get that the other sites don't necessarily get because they don't have so much
Yep, I think you turned it on.
overlap with the lake.
Yeah, we can talk about that a little bit, and it's not just an August thing for sure. We have it in July sometimes too. Is that when there's a westerly flow, that includes northwesterly particularly, we'll get a little bit of marine air off the Great Salt Lake that stops us from starting as early as we'd like to, and sometimes it stops us from developing as much as we'd like to. I think from a thermal perspective, Morgan is, out of out of Heber and Morgan and Nephi and Logan is maybe the least reliable thermally, kinda. The other flip side of that coin, though, is that same effect saves us about as often as it hurts us. When the other sites will be overdeveloped and thunderstormy, especially Heber, when thunderstorms will form out over Strawberry and you get the Daniels Canyon winds. On those days, Morgan will often be just really nicely soarable. So it does happen, and like I say, I think Morgan starts later than most of the other sites. But really, really long cross countries are still possible, and a wonderful territory out of Morgan. And I think balanced with our ridge and our wave, it's still one of the all-around great sites in the whole West. And we're blessed to have more than one of those to enjoy here. I think Dan's back on. Are you on, Dan?
Dan? I called him earlier, and maybe I need to call him again. I thought I saw him sign on.
He's on.
Okay, you may
I
need
can
to
see
share
him
your screen.
in the list. There we go.
There you go. Gotcha. All right, we're back.
Dan, we can't hear your audio or your voice. Pictures are good. Pilots like pictures.
This is Dan flying in midwinter in his self-launcher.
Lynn, is this the first time people have operated out of Morgan in the wintertime?
It is, as far as I know anyway. Elk Mountain normally takes our tow plane out of service the weekend after Thanksgiving. Occasionally we've gone into December a little bit, but I think this is a February flight or something. January maybe.
Yeah, Dan's breaking new ground here. That's pretty cool.
Actually, I towed Dan up many years ago on Christmas Day one year just because we could.
Yeah, this is Bernie. I think this was just a couple weeks ago. Because of the depth of the snowbanks on the Hammerhead, I assisted Dan and got his vehicle off the Hammerhead. But I think this was mid-February, if I recall.
This is a different flight going onto the ridge, and I'll add a couple of comments. Dan was instrumental in getting this area of the ridge available to soar. It used to be excluded from us because of the Salt Lake City Class Bravo. And when Dan was soaring governor of Utah, the Class Bravo was redesigned around Salt Lake City that permitted us to access the ridge south of Morgan toward Bountiful. And it's just a wonderful place to soar. It's a wonderful place to learn how to ridge soar because it's pretty close to Morgan Airport, and just a delightful ridge. Our ridge we share with Logan, and it runs. The accessible part of the ridge runs from Bountiful up Abeam Logan Airport, 50 miles in length. There's a number of gaps that are a little bit challenging to get across, but that adds to the fun of it, really. And there's some really fun local ridge soaring right there within gliding distance of the Morgan Airport. You can go about 15 miles to the south and maybe 5 or 6 miles to the north, a distance of 20 miles with just no stress at all before you encounter the first difficult gap.
So I believe this footage is actually taken with his 360-degree camera, which is pretty cool. That's how we're seeing all these different views.
I'm not sure, Bertie, do you remember that day? It might be a thermally day that he's...
Yeah, it was a thermally day, although the mission set that Dan some camera work with, as Art said, is the 360 Rilo camera. And so we had worked a thermal up on Snow Basin, but then came out mid-valley just to do some formation work together and to do some camera test work that he wanted to work on.
That's a nice looking LS4.
It is.
Those doggone LS4s, they keep beating me.
They're pesky, aren't they?
Pesky LS4s.
Yeah, there's a wing over.
So I think Dan's video really illustrates the strength of Morgan is that it has really wonderful soaring in all three mechanisms. Probably the strongest wave site in the area. Really wonderful ridge with that 50-mile ridge running from Bountiful up to Logan. Really great thermals. It's more difficult to do big distances out of Morgan than it is out of Heber or Logan, but the challenge is really part of the fun. And as I say, I hold, I've set a total of 15 state multi-place records, 13 of them flown out of Morgan.
That's a pretty cool airplane. Do you guys know how long the wingspan is?
13 and a half.
13 and a half? That's pretty dang cool.
13 and a half.
What a cool plane.
Yeah, just inside the snowbanks here for winter
Yeah,
flying. So,
that's perfect.
So center line's important, and then obviously the snowbanks down toward Dan and Dale's hangar, he really needs to stop short of that.
Well, that's pretty dang cool. Dan, I'm not sure if you can hear us, but extremely cool video. At this point, I guess maybe we can do some questions. Anybody have questions? I guess Lynn can probably answer them. Dan said that he's going to hang up and try logging in again. So in the meantime, Lynn can be our presenter. Hey, Dan, can you hear us?
Well, that was kind of fun.
Awesome. Hey, welcome back.
Yeah, well, I'm not quite sure what happened there, but I'm glad you got to see the video.
Dan, that was...
I commented very helpfully, Dan. I thought it was very helpful in my comments.
Oh, good. And actually, I heard your comments. I heard everybody, but I was not allowed to add my own. So probably maybe that was a good thing. So, okay.
Well, that was extremely cool. Thanks for sharing that.
Yep.
Maybe you ought to get some somebody that knows something other about computers to give you a little help.
Thank you, Stan. You and I will have no more discussion concerning your upcoming presentation, so don't forget it.
Any questions, folks?
Yeah, I have a question.
Go ahead, Brett.
Yeah, Dan, you spoke. I've flown at Morgan a good amount and trained there, and heard about the optical illusion with the slanting of the field, but I haven't heard of it in terms of an illusion for speed. I always thought it was an illusion for height. Can you explain that a little bit?
I can. Let's take a look at that in two different perspectives. You're talking about the slanting of the runway, which is basically the end approach of 2-1 is higher than the actual end of the runway at the 0 or 0-3 end as you arrive on 2-1. That's not what I'm talking about. That's just an elevation change from where you arrive and where you end up. 5,020 feet is the elevation that's measured of Morgan, but if you take off from the 2-1 departure, you're probably closer to 5,100 feet. And if you're at the very end of that departure, you're probably just closer to 4,080 feet. So there's a slant there. That is not the visual perspective issue that I'm talking about. What I'm talking about is that ridge that runs along the east side of the airfield, that when you're in downwind, you slowly descend over the top of that. And the closer you get to that, the more you think you're going faster because you're closer to the ground. You don't have that issue at Nephi. You don't have that issue at Logan. You don't have that issue at Heber because you are not that close to the ground on your downwind approach. You will be closer to the ground on downwind at Morgan. You want to make sure you keep your speed up. You don't want to slow down because you think you're going too fast. You need to be aware of that prior to making your base define. That's what I'm talking about.
Great, thanks.
Any other questions?
I just pulled up the topo. You're where most people turn their base leg. The ground is at 5,400 AGL or 5,400 MSL. So you're only 300 feet off the ground on a normal base leg when you're really 500 to 700 above field elevation.
It's not a major thing, but for a brand new pilot, it's an interesting experience.
All right, if there are no more questions, then just want to close out saying that our next seminar is going to be March 3rd. That's next Wednesday at 7:30 p.m. Bruno Vassal is going to be presenting on soaring out of Nephi. Again, thank you very much, Dan. This was a real terrific presentation. This has been recorded and will be posted on our website. Thanks.
Okay. Take care. Talk to y'all later.
All right. Have a good night, folks.